93.3.
Team Buck, listen to the man in the very deep voice. I like that guy, whoever he is. Bruce in Missouri, you've called in. Let's hear what you got to say. You're on the Buck Sexton Show.
Yes, Buck, I had a couple of comments. One was on the whole email situation, and I have some personal experience that I can relate. It may not be the first time you've heard this, but
by all means, sir.
I work for a software company, and one of our customers, it's a division of a well-known company that will remain nameless. They happen to be a division that specifically provides services for governmental agencies, right? A specific division just for that. I was talking with them about bringing in those emails into our software so that they could use that to process requests. And they were asking me these questions about, well, how do we get the email to stay on that, or can we route that email to two different locations? And I was asking, well, why is it you need to do that? And they said, oh, well, we're required to keep a copy of every email we receive. Okay? They require every single outside agency that provides them any service to keep a copy of every single email they receive. But I've been working with microcomputers ever since they first existed. I think I discovered microcomputers about 2 weeks after Bill Gates, and have been making a living on them since practically that time, way back from the 70s, okay? I'm, old enough to be your father. And I have another comment related to that. There is, if anyone who knows anything about the technology of emails, there is no way there's not a copy of those emails somewhere. It's just that one could argue that the problem with Congress is the whole thing is filled with lawyers, right? So they have people who can parse statements and can question people when they say, I found no legal culpability, and they're lawyers and prosecutors, and they can start questioning, well, now exactly what legal statutes did you evaluate to make that kind of a decision? And, of course, they have nothing at all. What we don't have is engineers who understand how to parse their statements and figure out what they're saying. If you notice what he said, he didn't say that you couldn't get the email from that archive. It was just going to be really, really hard.
Well, but that's essential, by the way, Bruce, because they, on the one hand, they say, oh, it would be really hard, but that's within the same breath, practically, as they told us that they assigned a criminal forensics team to try to get it out of the hard drive. So we'll assign a criminal forensics team to get this data out of a busted hard drive, but we won't get the copy out of the special server specifically set up so that we have copies in case a hard drive goes down. That's why we know they're lying. It does not make sense.
Oh, no, it doesn't make sense. It's one hand misdirecting and the other hand saying this, and they expect us to be all too stupid or to see just one soundbite and to not listen to the entire conversation.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
You have to know how to parse them the right way. It's like three-letter, agencies, one of which you work for. Whenever they come up to testify, you have to know. If you notice, when the man from the NSA was up doing his testimony before Congress, he didn't say that they can't listen to your telephone conversations or look at your.
He says they don't.
He said they're not allowed to.
Oh yeah, right. They're
not legally allowed to. He didn't say they can't do it.
Right.
He didn't answer the question.
I keep telling everybody, and Bruce, thank you for calling in and sharing some expertise here. I keep telling everybody, look, just assume the government collects everything and you'll never be surprised. Because they basically collect everything. So I don't want to hear any more people, oh my gosh, did you hear what the latest is from the Snowden revelation? They're collecting everything. Okay? Just start from there. It's all collected. It's all retrievable. It's all somewhere. We live in a giant Big Brother surveillance state, and now we're starting to see that, the government employees who run it, they're not just like really nice constitutionalists who believe in small government. No. They are petty little tyrants aplenty. Let's take Richard in California. Richard, you're on the Buck Sexton Show.
Hi, Buck.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can indeed. What's on your mind?
Oh, okay. This business of Boehner going to the Supreme Court, I think it's a total sham, and I think Obama's behind it as much as he is. The standing issue could not be more obvious. He doesn't represent all of Congress, so he's not going to have standing. He knows it, and Obama knows it.
I think you're right.
It's useful to him because it quiets his base. Hey, I went to the Supreme Court. I sued him. What do you want?
You said, by the way, it sounds, Richard, it sounds like you're flying in a Spitfire and you're about to get into a dogfight with the Luftwaffe in the background there. But yes, no,
Let me switch to.
No, that's okay. It's okay. It was kind of
and
a cool.
And the other side of it is Obama's side. It's useful to Obama to have the Supreme Court strike down the Republicans anytime he can.
Look, there's only so much joy that we can take out of the affirmation of the obvious that the Supreme Court gave us today, and that's exactly what happened, and that's where this 9-0 decision. Okay, so Obama can't completely make it up as he goes along, but are we to be happy, Richard, that that's been affirmed, or are we to be sad that there was a necessity for it to be affirmed in the first place? I ask you. I'm not really sure which one I fall into.
Well, in the current environment, especially with his appointees on there, I'm happy it's been affirmed because it does indicate that there's some kind of integrity around. Because if they wanted to vote for him, they could have certainly gotten away with it. They're appointed for life, so it's good to see that.
Okay, all right, a half full guy, Richard in California. Make sure you don't get. Make sure those planes overhead. I hope you're at a safe distance. They sounded like they were.
Yeah, but this other deal is a total fake. Both sides are in on it.
I hear you, man. All right, well, avoid the close air support there, and thank you very much for calling in, buddy. Good to hear from you. So Team Buck, in the next hour, I got a lot more. There's another Supreme Court case came down today, which we are going to be talking about with you. That will certainly be well worth the discussion, well worth the time. This is McCullen v. Coakley. Also talking about the latest IRS revelations. We'll have some fun with the Clintons. And if I have time, Russell Brand was mocking Judge Jeanine over at Fox News. Well, I guess what? If Russell's going to take on Judge Jeanine, I'm going to take on Russell because I like Judge Jeanine. And Russell Brand is a punk. So we might have time for that at the end of the second hour. That'll be interesting. It'll give me an excuse to use my most obnoxious Cockney accent because that's what Russell Brand has. So, he's not going to talk like this. Oh, that's just a preview. Get ready for it. We're going to have some fun with it. A lot in the next hour. Please do call in. The Broad Voice lines are open. The number is 888-900-3393. I'm getting fired up. Like I can just feel the heat in the Freedom Hut here. Team Buck, we're en fuego. That's all I've got to say, is that we're en fuego. The next hour, big time. Don't go anywhere.
Buck Sexton, the Blaze Radio Network.
Now, spreading freedom across the nation. This is 3, 2, 1.
The Buck Sexton Show.
Team Buck, thank you for staying with me. There was another Supreme Court decision that came down today, also 9-0. This one, not necessarily an Obama overstep. This one goes more to the heart of the progressive left, and it had to do with sidewalk counselors at abortion clinics. These are people who stand outside of abortion clinics, and from what I can read and what I know, they try to convince women who are on their way into the clinic to rethink what they are doing. They approach them. They say they would like to talk to them. They're not trying to frighten anyone. They're not threatening anyone. They're not physically barring access. They are just there to say, hey, maybe you should think more about this. What's amazing is that despite the fact that we have a First Amendment in this country, which you would think means that you can, have that point of view and it's constitutionally protected, believe in life and the protection of life, Massachusetts state law said no. Said that they couldn't be there, said that there was a buffer zone. There was supposed to be this 35-foot buffer zone around abortion clinics. So you had to be outside the zone. Now, this would, on any normal interpretation of the First Amendment, be immediately in violation because of viewpoint discrimination. What's interesting here is that Roberts, Obamacare Roberts, John Roberts, Supreme Court Justice, He was joined by Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan in saying that a statute that bars sidewalk counselors from a certain buffer zone of the clinic, that is content and viewpoint neutral. And therefore, it doesn't need to receive a strict scrutiny analysis, which is the highest scrutiny the government has to adhere to if it's going to infringe on the First Amendment. So they were essentially saying, well, no, this is just to sort of clear the area and keep people free to access their, as of now, still constitutionally protected right to an abortion. But this is insane. And Alito's concurrence says just as much, because this is blatant viewpoint discrimination. This couldn't be more obvious. It is a state statute passed specifically targeting a certain group of disfavored individuals and trying to silence their constitutionally protected speech. It could not be more obvious. Clinic workers, despite the buffer zone, clinic workers can go out, they can speak to pregnant women, they can do whatever they want. And they can say, hey, no, it's okay. Come here. We'll talk to you about the services inside. So that's all fine. But sidewalk counselors, they're barred from saying, hey, that clinic is not actually held to surgical standard. Do you know that? It might not be safe. And maybe you should rethink whether you want to keep the unborn child that you are currently carrying. No, they couldn't say that. Roberts was claiming in the opinion that came down today that the law only applies to clinic workers, or rather it's neutral because the law applies to clinic workers who are trying to do their job. But it's not narrowly tailored enough. That's, for example, why they get into trouble. That's why you had this 9-0 decision, because it was so obvious that this was not about keeping anyone safe, because then you just say, okay, well, nobody can be within a 35-foot buffer zone because there has to be access into. But, is that a law that exists for every building? Is that a law that exists all over the country? There's a law that forbids people from blocking entrances as under federal law, but in this case, they were specifying that there were only some people who had to be outside of this buffer zone. So when you have Scalia, Kennedy, and Thomas who concur in the judgment, but then they have to go further and say, this is obviously viewpoint discrimination. This is the state favoring pro-abortion speech and is banning abortion-related speech in general in a certain area, which is discriminatory. And therefore, it has to be under strict scrutiny. But they don't want it to go to strict scrutiny because then the state is essentially saying you have a special and sacred right to an abortion. That's what they would have to say for strict scrutiny. And I think that that's what much of the government believes. It's certainly what the Obama administration believes. So the problem with this decision is while it's 9-0, while it comes down and it says that you can't create some special speech zone and only say some people have to stay out of it, but other people can be in it, that's problematic. If you're creating a zone for the purposes of safety, you don't have to specify who's in that zone, right? It's just, well, you can't block access. Well, then just say you can't block access. But they didn't want to block access, don't you see? They didn't want people to actually try to convince women at the very last moment to spare the life of their unborn child. They didn't want that. That was what the state of Massachusetts was trying to avoid. And that's, of course, now the policy of the federal government still is to give a special protection. It's almost like they think it's some kind of a sacrament, the right to an abortion. And just wait until Obamacare is funding abortions by the millions. That's, of course, coming. They say it won't, but they'll find a way. So the problem with the way this decision came down, just as with Noel Canning, which is a canning company, I think, in Oregon for Pepsi, against the National Labor Relations Board, Scalia was saying, look, the whole notion of recess appointments come from a time when the Congress only met for a few months a year. Imagine that, by the way. Think of how many of our problems would seemingly melt away. Imagine that for a moment.